All right. I guess it's that time.
Good
So,
morning, everyone.
yeah, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Before I mute,
Hi.
everybody okay?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Um, so remember, what we'll do is I'm going to mute all the microphones, but use the chat box. And we'll go 50 minutes or so, and then we'll take a break. And then either then or at the end, we'll go over the questions people have. And also, we have the pre-questionnaire. I don't know if Holly sent that, but we'll go over that too. So don't worry about it. I will say too, well, I'm going to mute you all. So there you go. You are now muted. These, I just found that using or doing something on ants and termites was important. You don't have to be an expert by any chance at all, because there's lots to know on it. But people ask a lot about ants, and so that's probably a bigger one than the termites. The termites, to me, are are a bigger issue in that people need to know when or what kind of termites they have. And I tell you the truth, I know I can probably identify them, but I'm not going to, only because I don't positively identifying them is crucial to making sure that you've got the right treatment going. So if it's a drywood termite versus a subterranean. But anyways, but you wouldn't believe what great peace of mind it is for people to know that, okay, this is not a termite. And it really relaxes people, and thought that they begin to think that they're not as big a trouble as they think they are. But if I do find it as a termite, then I will actually make sure to preserve it and send it to the entomologist for a positive ID, because I want a certified answer before I would tell them. But we'll get into termites too. But I think ants is a great topic too. It's very interesting. A lot of ants out there. And if you're alive here, I would show you the ant collection, thanks to Dr. Fred Santana, who's a retired entomologist, and he used to come and do our talks on ants and termites over the years. And so these are his presentations. He takes a lot of his own pictures, and he donated some actual specimens too. It was beautiful cases of insects there. So let's proceed here, and hopefully everything will go well with this program. Let's see if it will advance. First of all, we'll try next. Okay, some amazing factoids about ants. By weight, the world ant population equals world human population. So that's a lot of ants. That's a lot of biomass there. It said 10 trillion ants spread across the world's habitats. And I think the most interesting one too, I don't know how you know this or not, but ants are oblivious to humans. They don't know we are here. Wow, that's an interesting thought. Although, you would think fire ants sort of know that you're here. And I mean, they have value. A lot of things eat them. They eat a lot of things. They are part of the natural environment. They move seeds. They pollinate flowers. They're predators of a lot of pests. So, I mean, for the most part, they have value, and they have a part in the environment. And again, not all the ants are bad. And a lot of the bad ants, of course, were ones that were introduced accidentally. So, all the typical signs of ants, you're going to see, ant mounds and trailing ants and ants coming and going. But in general, it's helpful to be able to identify what ants are what ants, so that we can then get the best remedy to the problem. And, by industry, ant control's number one. And I still remember a lady calling up, almost crying, that she was having guests over and they were going to think she was filthy because she had ants. Who doesn't have ants? Everybody has ants now and again. You never win the war, but you can win the battle on keeping them outside anyways. And we've got 221 species of ants in Florida. About 20 of them are pests. And they are, again, everywhere. And we've got some new ones, of course, that have moved in. And Florida is a great place for ants because, a lot of these ants may be tropical or subtropical in nature, and they just do well here. But if we can identify them, that helps a lot into control. Now, here's the thing that may alleviate a lot of people's fears, of course. How do you tell a termite from an ant with wings on? Well, as you can see, the main difference is, well, this is the termite, and they call them Isoptera. They have equal wings, iso same and ptera wing. They have a broad waist, and they have what they call beaded antennas. In comparison, ants have elbowed antenna, as you can see here, joints here. They have slightly different wings too. They're not the same. And they have this wasp waist or constricted waist. So it's very easy to tell those apart. And I will say too, when we get to termites, only the winged termites can be identified. The actual workers, you can't identify them and make a positive ID. So again, termites, the winged ones, or they call them alates, or the reproductives, the antenna are beaded. They have a wide waist, and then again, in this case, the wings are equal. Ants, elbowed antenna, the narrowed thread-like or wasp waist, and in this case, the wings are not equal. So ants have complete metamorphosis. So they go from egg to larva to pupa to adult. And, they're fairly long-lived. The workers, 1 to 7 years. You would think they'd work themselves to death. And egg to adult, 6 weeks to 2 months. But look at this. The queens, although they don't have the very best life in the world, just laying eggs and eggs and eggs every day, up to 20 years. So they're well taken care of. They're protected, and potentially they can live a long, long time. If the colonies are big enough, in spring and summer, they'll send out reproductives, where they send out kings and queens, and hopefully they reproduce, and then they can actually start up their own colony somewhere if they survive. So here's just an illustration showing the different stages. Of course, you've got the eggs, you've got the larva here. You've got queens and workers. All the workers are sterile females. The queen drops her wings as she begins to set up her shop there. And it's interesting too that most ants will feed mouth to mouth, so they have to feed the larva or the grub stage. And the grub stage, of course, has little mandibles, but for the most part, ants can never consume solids. They can only consume liquids, but they can take a solid piece of food and let the grub chew it up. And sometimes the grub will give some of that back too. So that's sort of interesting. So between the queen and the females, it's a complete female society. The males will, of course, mate, but then they die, so they're gone. And the eggs, of course, are fertilized for the life of the queen. The males develop from unfertilized eggs, interesting, and the females from fertilized eggs. And just like sort of bees too, the queens or the future queens have a special diet, and so they develop into that queen caste stage. And look at this, some species have no use for males and reproduce by parthenogenesis, so they never have to have any presence with a male to reproduce. Most of the ants around here are going to be in the soil, but they can live in other little nooks and crannies, hollows and voids and such there. And generally you'll know where they are because of activity. Some ants are very messy as far as the soil they move around. Sometimes there's wood shavings, but they don't eat wood. They just excavate the wood in the case of Florida carpenter ants. So as you check in your house or even outside, you'll find a lot of places where ants will set up their nests. Now, generally, ants like a couple of different things. They really like their sweets. Many of the pest ants are sweet feeders. And that could be things like honeydew, which is the waste product from insects like mealybugs, whiteflies, aphids, and soft scales. Other, sweets, certainly sugar and all syrupy materials, oils, soybean oil or animal oils, etc. And then, true protein, which may be from an insect. And remember, too, with this honeydew, in nature, at least in the outside there, sometimes the ants will protect and tend these insects, the aphids, mealybugs, scale insects, whiteflies, and protect them for the purpose of milking them or farming them for the honeydew. So the honeydew is very valuable to them as far as a food source. And that's in nature, that's where they're going to get a lot of it. So here's a fire ant moving an aphid around. And of course, it's not killing it, it's just moving it about. And sometimes you'll find aphid infestations really get moving quickly because the ants are sort of helping them out by moving them from place to place. So again, they sort of farm them like cows in a way, placing them, and then here's a little drip of honeydew right there at the tail end. So it's a waste product from that aphid. When it feeds into the plant and sucks up carbohydrates, there's just so many that it has to excrete the excess, and out comes the honeydew. And remember too, with honeydew, when it drips down from infestations of aphids or other honeydew producing insects, it drips down below. You can see this sort of glistening shininess to where it accumulates, and then you'll get sooty mold, which is really a benign mold will grow on it. And so the mold itself is not an issue. It's really a sign that there are aphids above. So always be looking up. So here's some like compact carpenter ants farming some aphids here. Again, they tend them very, gently because they are their livestock in a lot of ways. So kudos for them for doing that, but they tend to also work against us as far as cultivating them, if you will. Here's some other ants, and this was just, I think, strawberry jam or something. So a lot of these will take advantage of our sweets that we might drop or leave somewhere and take advantage of it as a food. So as I was telling you, ants can only swallow liquids, so they can only lick up materials. They can't crush or eat anything. There's always this urban myth that, you give ants like grits, they eat them, they drink water, and then they explode from the inside. It will never happen because they can't consume anything solid, only liquids. It says here, solid food is licked or crushed by workers and then swallowed, or given to larval stage to break down. And again, sometimes the larvae have a little bit better chewing apparatus to take care of that. And then there are going to be a lot of mouth-to-mouth feeding. Some, as we'll see, like the white-footed ants, don't really do that as much. And when they look for food, they just randomly search. But of course, once they find it, they can leave chemical trails and communicate chemically with others as to where the food is. And before long, everybody's there feeding on things, which can be to our advantage in some cases as far as treating them too. And with the ant control, we're always looking for the least toxic control. And baiting, as we'll see with boric acid type baits, is really effective, low toxicity. But if we can kill the queen, that's pretty much the end of the colony. And by controlling this, though, we're just going to win battles. Win the battles, not the wars, because they're going to be constantly reinfesting from outside. So these are our main Florida pest ants. The Caribbean crazy ant, now called the tawny crazy ant, is the worst. But they don't bite, they don't sting, they don't chew wood. They just are mega colonies of millions and millions, and we'll talk about that then. But some, that you've seen before. Some are not that common or that big of a deal. And but some, have come in several years ago. They make a big splash, and I just find, like a lot of invading things, something begins to compete with them or suppress them, and then they're there, but they're in the background, not really causing as much damage as before. But people are very sensitive to the ants as far as customers coming in. And then you got these again that they form super or mega colonies, again up to 3 million. Things like white-footed ants have been there. Of course, fire ants. The tawny or Caribbean crazy ant is the worst, and I'll show you why in a little while here. All right, red imported fire ant. And, we have a native fire ant too. So I guess we thought, hey, we should get one of those red imported fire ants. But I think they came in accidentally, probably, with shipping and ballast soil and such. But they're here from South America originally. And it says here to be among 100 of the world's worst invasive alien species. So we've got them. They tend to be oops, darn it. Too sensitive in color, sort of mahogany color, a bit shiny, and they can vary a lot in size within a colony, from an eighth of an inch to a quarter of an inch. They like sunny areas because it helps their nest and their egg and pupa and larva develop very easily. Look at this, high reproductive rate, 800 to 1,000 eggs a day in a colony. So they are successful, and queens are long-lived, up to 7 years. So you may get rid of them for a while, but they'll be back, as they say. And the worst part about them is the sting, and it's not the bite, it's a sting. And actually, when they attack, they pick up with their mandibles a little tiny flap of skin. They bend their abdomen under their legs and push their stinger into it. And as you well know, the pain of it there too. And some people have allergic reactions. That's worse. What they'll do is sometimes they'll get up on you, and then they release an alarm pheromone, so they all sting at the same time, and just makes for a worse experience there. I'm not a doctor. We're not doctors, but these were things that have been noted to help with the sting relief. But just like a lot of these things, they show up, those little pustules, little bites there, and then they go away. So unless you're allergic, we can live with that. There can be single queen colonies, or there can be multiple queen colonies. And in some of these single queen, you can have multiple size workers. So let's see here. Whoops. So you've got some large workers, some smaller workers, and I think there's a picture coming up. We'll show the different sizes in these polymorphic or multiple sized colonies. Again, multiple queen colonies can exist, and these are all strategies that help them just do a lot better. When you see mounds, often you see them on the side of the road or in medians there. They're very fragile things. Of course, as they build them, there's a little bit of moisture and such, and that holds them together. There are galleries and interconnected chambers and such there. And then, of course, the part you don't see is underground, and so that is another part of that system. And there are a lot of lateral feeding tunnels, so they go out quite a distance. And when it gets cold, they will, of course, go deeper. And then when it gets warm, they'll come up. And they're very quick at moving about to take care of the varying temperature situations where if it gets cold, they'll very quickly move it down. If it gets too hot, too, of course, they move their colony back down as the temperature is warm. So here's the picture of the mound. And again, it's very fragile, but it does help with keeping it warm. And again, it can be too warm too. Here's the side tunnels, and so they're working off of there. And then underneath you have the other part of the chamber, and even deep tunnels too. So there's a lot you don't see underneath. And they move their brood, which is the eggs and the pupa and the larva, around a lot. And if you've ever seen, of course, these mounds here, sometimes they collapse on their own weight as they dry out and it gets warmer. I sometimes like just to step on one and watch those ants boil out, though. Really amazing. So what do the nests look like? Some are, just mounds. Oops. Some are real mounds here. Some are a little bit more diffuse. Some are just sort of dirty piles of soil, or even up against a sidewalk, or I've had some going up against my garage entrance there too. Again, messy, not very well constructed, and often temporary too. But you can see some other movement here. You can see they have a little bit of a tunnel here. Again, sort of messiness, and it's along a concrete edge or through a sparsely turfed area. So here's the bad news: is no control method eliminates fire ants forever. And they like those sunny areas. They like where we live, really. They came from South America originally, and where there were some natural controls to suppress them. We'll talk about that too. But of all the controls, baits is the best. It uses less of the active ingredient, which is the actual toxicant, and they take to it very well. You can see here's a queen here, and so they're grooming and they're feeding her, and they're feeding each other too. So by feeding each other with this type of bait, they systematically give it to each other. So it's sort of a remote control damage. And eventually, depending on what type of toxicant that's being used, eventually it kills them. But there's very small amounts of that toxicant that are in there. So fire ants, a very rapid rate of reproduction. They don't need much to get disturbed. They're very efficient in their setup of their nests. Some are interconnected. But the bottom line is we got to kill the queen. And so that's the bottom line. And baiting can do this. The beauty part is that the ants like the bait, and so they deliver it to the nest and throughout, and eventually everybody gets a dose of it. And so that's again, the beauty of that particular system. And the chemical use is very small amount, so it's a very efficient, safe way of doing it. There's all types of different baits. For sure, Amdro's been around for a very long time, but really they're all the same type of setup, where they have a corn grit, then they use a soybean oil, and then they put the toxicant in that. So what happens is they They pick up the grit, they bring it down underground, and they lick off the oil that's got the toxicant. They feed it to everybody, and eventually everybody gets a dose. The only difference in the baits is the mode of action, and how long it takes to kill them too, because some of them may take quite a bit. You don't have to remember all the chemical names or anything. I would say, again, the bottom line is that the baits that they have are very effective, not only for treating mounds, but also for treating larger areas where they might be. Again, there's another one, once and done. They have these catchy little names. Again, the chemicals may be different, but they often have different chemical modes of action, and that's the bottom one here. So everybody's got one. Here's a growth regulator, and growth regulators will cause the insect to either be forced into the next stage before it's ready, or keep it at the stage it's at, and so that can be effective too. You could see, I would say, let's see, can't tell there, can't even see there. A lot of these though are caution materials, but we always say read the label. The label's the law. Here's an important thing though: you got to use fresh bait, because the soybean oil will go rancid, and the ants will not touch it once that happens. So you don't want to like use it and then put it in a hot garage, because it's not going to keep very well. And you want to, well, let's see. There's Dr. Santana's cure for that for a while, is to take a Ziploc baggie or some kind of seal, and you've probably broken the seal to use it, so this replaces the seal, at least temporarily, and it helps it keep it fresher longer, because they will not go to it. They pick it up very rapidly. They love oil, and so they give themselves a good dose of that. So when you're baiting it, putting it down, you sprinkle the baits around the nest. You don't want to mess up with the mound, because that's just going to get them mad. Apply when the ground is dry. Avoid applying when the dew is on the grass. These are the best management practices anyways here. Apply in late afternoon during the summer, between 70 and 85 degrees. And again, depending on the material, it could take 1 to 4 weeks for the whole colony to die. And in the meantime, there might be another colony that's moving in. So again, it's a constant battle. And that's about as best that we can do. So there they are, coming up to the granules of grit with the soybean oil and the toxicant in there. They really like it. They, as they say, recruit to it very, very quickly. Now, there are other ways too. Now, of course, the bait system is going to be fairly slow. There are other ways. There are some stronger materials that you can put on the mound that will kill it quicker. And it may be in an emergency type situation or something. You're having a picnic or something, and it has to be done quicker. Excuse me. So it depends what it is. But here's another one too, which really not recommending because it's hazardous. But I've done it before, taking hot water and pouring on the nest. It kills them. And I think there was even a gentleman around here before my time, I heard, that would offer to steam your fire ants, and had a pipe and would push it down into the nest and then steam them. And to me, they did turn color like a lobster would. But anyways, I tried it once or twice, and but it's hazardous. You don't want to be walking around with boiling water. There's another one too, which is derived from pine oil, Insecto Formula 7. Let me see, there it is. But look at this, is a warning product. And although the pine oils are the #1 ingredient, it's a warning or moderately toxic material. And we'll talk more about that in our pesticide lesson there. Where do you find some of these other things? Often they're not at the box stores. They're often at some of the hardware stores. where they may have a lot of other brands. So a couple ways of doing it, but just to look, you would think pine oil being natural and organic would be safer, but it's actually it's more dangerous than, or has more toxicity than a caution material like some of the baits. All right, again, you don't need to know all these, but this is for your reference. There are a lot of different baits available, so they all have again, I want to call it catchy names. Ceasefire, that's a good one. Once and done. Extinguish, ooh, that's a good one too. Eliminator, justice, strike, all these good ones. And also talking about spinosad. Now, spinosad is an organic material derived from bacteria they found in Barbados under a sugar mill or rum factory or something. But it's very toxic to ants and fire ants, and it can be used in home garden settings for removal of fire ants, because sometimes fire ants will get into edible areas where you wouldn't want to put lawn control type pesticides. But spinosad, you have to read the label on these, can be used, and it is effective. And you can, again, but in addition to mound treatment, you can do broadcast treatments too. But again, most of these baits are going to be slow acting, but they're going to be systemic and more of a total eliminator. All right, so I was just talking about some of the variety of ones, how long it takes. Look at this. One of these is 8+ weeks. Whoa. And how they kill, like this once and done is a nervous system attacker. Some are metabolic, some are insect growth regulators. So there's a lot of different ways these work, these new chemistries. Or even in the spinosad, nervous system damage. So just for your reference there. Once and done, they're talking about this here. I guess it's relatively fast. Kills the fire ant nest in 3 days, so that's pretty good. And again, a lot of these things have to be ingested. This one is a nerve poison, has reduced risks as per EPA. So it all depends on what the consumer needs as far as how quickly something needs to be killed. And so you can go for that. But again, read the label, because the label will tell you a lot of this. And there's, again, a lot of brands, but the label is the law, and it's a legal document that will give the information you need to make the proper decision on that. So we talked about fire ant control in vegetable gardens, but I think probably the very best or easiest one is the spinosad. It's readily available, but you can try pyrethrins. There's some others, but I think spinosad is registered for use in gardens and even organic settings too. Though a lot of these others you got to keep away from the edible part, and because they're not registered for vegetable gardens. So read the label again for that. There are a number of contact ones. They are more quick acting. They're more toxic, and you'll see them. Any garden center is going to have these. So I still say with fire ants, the baits are the best, longest lasting, although slow treatments. Now, years ago too, they investigated what in South America is helping to keep the fire ants suppressed to a level that we can live with. And they found that there was a fly that was a parasite or a predator, I guess you could say here, of fire ants, and it's called the decapitating fly. And so here's the decapitating fly right here, and it actually flies up very carefully and lays an egg into the head here, I guess. The egg hatches, the larva then feeds on the head drops off. Inside is the larva, then the pupa, and then it hatches out. So it was pretty gruesome, but somewhat, just another tool, should I say. And they released some in Punta Gorda years ago here. I don't know if they're still here or not. They made sure it was okay to release them, so that was good. And the ants supposedly, too, in addition to, of course, getting your head falling off, there is some psychological warfare, because the ants know this is a problem, and they get on the defensive very quickly when these are here. And again, this fly only parasitizes imported fire ants. So this was in its native range, and so it only attacks and takes care of these, because it would be terrible if it jumped species for sure, but it hasn't. Again, it's been released, and so hopefully in the background it's doing some work. Here's the fly. Here's the result there. So gruesome, but it does work good. Here's the larva inside, and the pupa sort of takes the shape of the head, and out comes the new fly out of the head. And I don't know at what point the head falls off, but I'm sure it's not pleasant for the ant. Okay. So that's fire ants. That's probably, well, it's one of the #1 questions, but I think a lot of people, consumers, know about using baits. But then there's a lot of other types of ants out there. Now this one, the elongate twig ant, does sting. And they call it the neck biter sometimes, because if you're working outside, sometimes they'll fall behind your neck and a piece of clothing, and then you'll go, what's crawling back there? And you touch and ow, and they have a pretty good sting. They are very wasp-like in appearance and how they move about, and they have very small colonies, especially in hollow stems. If you have Mexican petunia, and you've cut it, and sometimes you have stubs there, they love to get into there. I've seen them in rose stubs that have died back. But anywhere where they can get in and find a hollow opening. They are hunters. They feed on things like insects mostly. And I can find them almost every day outside of my yard. Now this is interesting. Some ants will take advantage of what they call these extra floral nectary. You see these little disc-like things here? They're almost like feeders for ants, and I don't know if this is why the plant or the flower is offering this, but it's not inside where you think most of the nectaries are. The nectaries are on the outside, and ants can feed on that too. But just a note, because many ants will take advantage of those. So here's the elongate twig ant. They're hiding in these little opening where there might have been a cut stem, and then the pith is exposed there, and they can use that void for setting up a little nest. So here they are inside. There are a couple other ones that are smaller. There's one that's a golden, and it's smaller, and again, it stings pretty darn good. So you may not even ever see what stung you, but if you see these out, they are elongated. They're very quick moving. They almost resemble a wasp in a way. But I mean, they're here, and they're not that big of a problem. All right, now here's our hero ant. And we're talking about, ants in general, but this is our hero ant, the pyramid ant. And pyramid ants make a pretty nice nest. It doesn't necessarily look like a pyramid. It looks more like a pitfall or a crater, I guess, but it is got elevation to it, and it has a nice little open hole. Generally as big as a pencil width here. And you can see these all over the place. There it is there. The good thing is that these ants, the pyramid ant, preys on the brood and newly formed nest of fire ant queens. So, and reported to attack newly mated fire ant queens. So that's the good thing. It's a native ant. It's not a pest ant. And you see them all the time, everywhere. How many people have not seen these type of nests? They're just all over the place. When you see them, it doesn't mean you need to control them. They're actually beneficial, and they're fighting the good war of controlling our fire ants. So there it is, very nondescript, sort of 20 color, somewhat translucent, but it's our friend, so don't touch them. All right, carpenter ants, and generally we're going to talk about the Florida carpenter ant. Again, you may have been more used to the totally black carpenter ant up north, and those are way more destructive, and will tend to go after wood. Here, the Florida carpenter ant, the wood has to be very wet and mushy for them to go after. So they generally will not go after sound wood. They never eat the wood. They just excavate it out to make galleries for their nests. And they can also use a number of different types of already made openings, voids. They've been known to go into and excavate out styrofoam even. You can find them. I used to have this little green recycling bin that I'd store newspaper in and let it get wet because I would let it mush up a little bit before I mulched it. And almost every time when I flipped it over, there was a colony in there, and they weren't very happy when I opened them up, and they started trying to run away with their pupa and larvae and eggs, and some were biting me. And the soldier ones are pretty good size. They have pretty good mandibles, and what they'll do is they'll make a slice, and then they have the ability to squirt formic acid on it to make it sting. But in Florida, I would say they are an occasional invader. They can be, again, several different sizes, and they're nocturnal too. They will only operate generally at night, but they're not a huge structural problem versus ones that would be out of Florida or further north that you might have been more used to. So nocturnal, they like wet, mushy wood, and they'll have a lot of satellite nests too. They might live in a cavity of a trunk somewhere, but then they're going to send out and have multiple satellite nests. Another place I found them is just if you have big, chunky pine mulch, you'll find them in that. Sometimes you'll find them if you have a queen palm and then all the seeds begin to build up underneath. That leaves enough voids in there that's very suitable for them as a nest. So there's a lot of different things, but when they come into the house, it's mostly accidental. And you can usually find where they're coming and going. I mean, if there was a true infestation, you'd probably know it. And there might even be enough that you'd hear rustling in the walls, too, as they move about. But look here. Here's a water meter, and they've made a nest in here. It's a nice void. So you've got they're carrying pupa. They've been discovered, so they're probably going to evacuate here. So they've got the pupa and the larva. And again, they like their honeydew, and they like tending aphids for that. Here's the queens. They're very big, and of course, you'll see them when they are out flying about looking for a place to set up shop. You'll also see, especially on summer nights where there's a light and a light-colored wall, it will attract hundreds and thousands of male carpenter ants too, which a lot of people get freaked out about. There's really nothing you can do about it, though. I mean, when you see queens and kings flying during the summer, they have no nest yet. And again, the males are all going to die. The queens, if they're fortunate enough, may be able to set up a nest somewhere. Um, so if they come in, if you find them inside, they may have been attracted to a light, but there may be a wet wood problem, a moisture problem. Um, Again, they're nocturnal, so you want to see where they're coming and going. And the bottom line, though, again, we've got to find the nest and kill the queen. So you can actually put out some bait for them to pick up, and then they will come and go as others find out about the food here, and then you can maybe trace back their trailing back to where they're coming. Again, most of the time they're from outside coming in, but there may be situations where they're in a void somewhere in the wall. Here's the males, and they look very different. They are very elongated, long-legged, almost waspy looking, almost unidentifiable as an ant at that point. But they're all males, and people will call up. There'll be thousands and thousands of them. Not much to do about it. They'll die on their own accord, and that's that. So what can you do to take care of these carpenter ants? Well, and as we'll talk with termites, there's actually borate or boric acid treatment for wood, so that's already in place, hopefully. There's a number of different types of granular baits, too. Baits, again, being a good thing. And you can use the liquid boric acid baits, too. Now, a lot of the taro baits are very small, and, the taro syrup, which has the boric acid and a sugar syrup, is pretty small, but Dr. Santana introduced us to this KM Ant Pro bait dispenser with gourmet liquid ant bait. Sounds great. But you can't find those at most box stores. You're going to have to look at the hardware stores, like True Value and Ace, to have them, because they just have some different things there that, are very interesting. But you can bait them with a 2.5% liquid boric acid bait, which is Taro. Taro is one of the brands. But if you needed to get more of it, the gourmet ant bait comes in a larger container. And sometimes Dr. Santana was mentioning it about cutting it a little bit with a little bit of water. But you don't want it. The ants have to ingest enough of it to kill them, number one. And they don't want to be repelled by it, or it's too thick and syrupy. But generally, how it comes is fine to use right out of the container. So here he is just putting out his little Dixie cup traps here. Some of the taro traps come already set. You just clip off the end and put them out. They're pre-baited of sorts. And but if you bought the little container, then you need some kind of receptacle to put it in. And once they found it, they're going to start feeding on it and telling everybody. And you'll have to keep replacing it, too. Now, here's the KM Ant Pro liquid bait dispenser. I feel like this is a commercial or something, but it's sort of unique, and I've seen them. They're not cheap either. But it looks like almost like a hummingbird feeder. And so it has a bigger reservoir for the material. And it's really for outside use, because it just holds a larger quantity, and it's a good way to dispense it. Again, here's your taro, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, has the boric acid, least toxic. Same thing here with the gourmet ant bait, just a fancier name for it, and a larger container of it too. All right, so we've looked at the Florida carpenter ant model. Now we've got the new model, the compact carpenter ant, which came in a few years ago. And it looks like if you took a Florida carpenter ant and said, let's make a compact model of this, they're much stubbier and compressed looking. And one of the things is they are diurnal. They come out during the day only. And they're all over the place now. I used to just see them in Sarasota, but they're just widespread now. So I would say they're as common or more common. They do take to the boric acid baits very well. But again, they're only going to be active during the daytime, which is an opposite of the Florida copper ant, which is nocturnal. And you'll see them trailing around different areas. They'll set up their nest in different spots, again, looking for voids, even in window casings. But I find them a lot in palm leaf boots, hollow twigs, other openings and such there. Again, there's a number of things to control them. And remember, too, mechanical barriers or sealing up openings is not a bad way to go. There are perimeter sprays where people will spray the entire outside of the house, like a foot out and a foot up. And that tends to keep a wide range of different creatures out, not just ants. But I would say, to me, they're just not a big a deal. I've never seen any huge infestations. They're everywhere. And here's males again, too. Again, males not really being a big problem. But, people who've never experienced insects, if they're outside, they think any ant is an issue. And so they got to take action, I guess. Here's compact copper ants and living in a hole at the base of a wall. So they're very opportunistic in where they will set up their shop. But I bet if you go out today and look around your house, you'll find them, because I know I can. But they're not at a level that's causing any botheration to me. Now, sometimes Dr. Santana would throw these little tricks and tips in here. Somebody recommended adding a little tuna can liquid to it. I don't know, maybe it just adds to the flavor of the boric acid. Not saying that's a recommendation there. But other controls for copper ants, you can use dust that you can put into walls. Again, perimeter sprays, and this Termidor is often used again for termite control as well. But there are desiccating dust and diatomaceous earth. There's all types of different types of things to deal with that. So you have a lot of tools to control this. All right, there are some well, I'll tell you what, I think it's probably time to take a break. Did you think so?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, good. I hear some voice.
Yes.
So let's take a bio break and come back in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very good.
Can they hear us too?
No, yes, he unmuted us. I'm gonna.
I'll start back up and I will mute you all. There you go. All right. Okay. Okay. Sweet feeding ants and other copper ants. So again, sweet feed in the form of honeydew or whatever they can find that sugary is very popular with ants because they use it, of course, for energy. And let's see. Next. Okay. Let me put that down here. All right. As far as mixing taro or gourmet, I'm not really recommending that. I think that just use it as it is. Certainly, as water evaporates out of it, it may become less palatable to them because the sugar, I guess, in it actually hides the toxicant taste to them, or they wouldn't pick it up. But I would say just use it as is, because it's been pre-mixed, and to play around with it, trying to cut it with water is probably going to be messy and maybe disappointing too. All right, some other ants that you may encounter. I haven't necessarily encountered these. PHARAOH ants are often very much indoor ants, and they are again, minute, sort of an orangey color. But they are going to be found more indoors than anything. So that's when they can become sort of a pest. And they're worldwide in distribution. So we've got our share too. This is interesting. Again, they can live inside in strange places, just in papers or boxes or envelopes. So they're very cryptic. And the other part is, if you spray them, they get stressed and the colony splits or buds. So you can take one colony, stress it, and it will turn it into two colonies. So they have multiple queens, and so don't stress them. Oh, they're not stressing you, though, of course, but don't stress them. So be careful with that. But nobody's come with PHARAOH ants to me, but I know Dr. Santana had some in Sarasota County. Certainly, bait stations are fine. They like sweet and protein, so he was recommending putting peanut butter as a sort of pre-bait bait to get them to come out and get more used to taking some of the bait that you're going to put out. Common along on window ledges too, which is interesting. They might find some openings or voids in that area, but he put some peanut butter out, and you can see the results were pretty drastic. So if you find a type of ant that's indoors and it's nesting in boxes or envelopes or strange indoor areas, it's probably a PHARAOH ant. There's some other bait stations, not just the sweet feed, but some of these would have other baits. And again, this is pre-baited with openings, and they come inside and they pick it up. And again, they would take it to the variety of other ants and kill them that way. All right, now crazy ants, this is not the Caribbean or 20 crazy ant yet, but this is the plain old crazy ant. And they're called crazy ants because they have very herky-jerky movements, and you can see them. I mean, a lot of parking areas have them, and they have very long antennae. Some days they call them longhorn ants. You can see here, look at how big those antennae are. Very erratic, but you can see them. They're small, but not that small. And at the old office, I know we had some in the parking lot. They would even get up into some of the vehicles and make a colony there, unfortunately, too. But wherever there's voids or openings, they're going to make nests. They will eat a lot of different things, sweet and proteins, and they will travel great distances. But they're mostly outside. But again, they might be in such numbers they'll cause a problem. And I just know that at the old Eastport office that they were getting up into people's vehicles and causing colonies to be developed there. So again, boric acid baits can work. There's a lot of number of things that can work. But I've never found these to be a household problem. I always find them more in, again, larger parking type areas for whatever reason seem to be popular. Probably because it's open. There may even be some food around there people drop. And so once you've seen crazy ants, you'll know them. So now ghost ants, probably everybody's had these, and so these are common indoors, and they're called ghost ants because they're so small and they have a very transparent abdomen and legs. So from our vantage point, they almost look like there's not a complete ant there. And they don't bite, they don't sting, but they're a nuisance, and they can produce a lot of individuals. They move quickly, but you'll find them a lot indoors. Again, feeding on sweet foods. And like a lot of these, they will trail. And again, they're communicating and feeding each other mouth to mouth too. So that's a sort of foraging activity. Sweet feeds, they'll live outdoors, but they often are going to be indoors. They may even be in voids or between books or book binding. So different type of colonies that they'll set up. And they may be living outdoors and just come in indoors looking for food too. Boric acid baits are fine. I've used that before. It worked pretty darn good. Pretty much make sure you keep feeding them though, because as long as they're taking it, you might as well give it to them, and so they can take care of the whole colony. So that the boric acid baits have worked for me very effectively for ghost ants. All right, another one that was a problem probably 10 years ago, and they're still there, but it's less of a problem, was the white-footed ant. And again, these common names come about because of somewhat of the appearance. The outer part of their leg is sort of yellow or ivory-colored, transparent, so that's why they call them white-footed ants. Smallish, but you can see them. They don't bite or sting, but they can make these super colonies or mega colonies up to 3 million. They love honeydew and sweets, and they often, in the past, at least when I had them, they would form colonies up under the eaves in the soffits or up in an attic, and you could see them trailing back and forth up and down the wall towards that. But they can have a lot of different places they can make nests. And as I was mentioning too, they produce, instead of a mouth-to-mouth thing, they produce sterile eggs, and that's how they feed the larvae and I guess their nest mates. They don't do a mouth-to-mouth feeding. So that's where it's a little bit troublesome to try to use something like boric acid, although boric acid does work, but for a different reason there. So very large numbers. There's so many that's how they become the problem, just because they're just all over the place at any one time. Now, it's a three-prong approach to control them. One is you can use boric. One treatment is boric acid. And as it says here, requires a long baiting period up to 5 weeks. Keeping in mind that, as we said, they produce these sterile eggs that they feed the young with, and so they're not mouth feeding the boric acid mouth to mouth, and because of that, they're not really spreading the boric acid around like others would. However, what I found with my situation is they started dying, and they started dying in such large amounts that eventually there weren't enough to feed all the larvae and take care of things, and the colony crashed. But I would find actual dead piles in my lanai, probably hundreds of them dead. And I said, wow, this is working. But it did take some time, and I kept having to put down more boric acid because they were consuming it and they loved it. So that's one facet. Here's some under a banana leaf, so that's why they're saying they can take, they're opportunistic as to where they might set up their shop there. And you can accidentally bring them into in potted plants sometimes. They do like nectar too, but they do like honeydew. And that's the other situation. Well, here's, just to show you, here's another one of these extra floral nectaries that this ant is taking advantage of. So it's not getting it from inside the flower, but really outside at the base of the flower. Some plants have that. Because they like sweet materials, the boric acid works, but they like the honeydew. And one thing we've got to do is make sure we control the aphis, whiteflies, mealybugs, scale insects, whatever, that are producing any honeydew. So that is the second prong of attack. Boric acid, number one, controlling the insects around your house that are producing honeydew. And so here's some aphids here. Look, the aphids are bellying up to this these veins like pigs to a trough here, and they're just using the honeydew. So it's a pretty good setup for them. But you'll find, though, that they will sometimes, well, they'll also sometimes, they like to get into electrical things, too. So here's some, for whatever reason, getting into a light switch. But they like to, let me see, I want to show you, because I don't have a good picture of that. But they like to bridge between your house and trees or shrubs. So you want to make sure that there's no branches touching your house, because they will, if you observe them, they'll go from the wall of your house to wherever the tree or shrub is touching. They'll cross that and then get to where the insects are that are producing the honeydew. So if you cut that bridge off, it tends to make it a lot less convenient for them. Again, between the removing bridges, using the boric acid and controlling insects that produce honeydew, that tends to take care of them. I had 2 separate colonies, one on one side of the house, one on the other side. And again, I don't think I had any bridging problems, but they were going up into the soffits there, and the boric acid, which took a long time, did eventually crash them. And I saw them dead by the thousands, and so that did work. And again, they can take advantage of a lot of different places to set up a nest. But they do love their boric acid. And if you need it, I didn't get a KM Ant Pro bait station. Probably should have, but I did use the PHARAOH that I had, and that worked pretty good too. But they ate it up a lot. They ate it up very quickly too. Once they find it, you got to make sure they can find it. They'll just call everybody and they'll be looking it up. So use the boric acid, use like horticultural oils or insecticidal soaps to control aphids and scale insects, and then make sure that you don't have that contact with the branches or the trees there we're bridging. Okay, Caribbean crazy ant. Now we saw the crazy ant, crazy enough. Now comes the Caribbean crazy ant, which has had several names. Now I think the accepted name is tawny crazy ant, just because of the color of it here. And they don't bite, they don't sting, they don't chew wood, but because of their numbers, they're almost unstoppable. And while they're probably here, I know more about them from DeSoto County and Sarasota County. They're very, smallish. Again, will travel quite a distance, and they have a disperse way of making nests. Any litter in the yard, they'll make a nest. And so if there's like trash or toys or whatever, they'll tend to set up shops everywhere. And the nests are just all over the place. And so that's where the problem comes up. And you're also limited to how many different types of pesticides you can use. Some you can only put down like twice a year, and then that's it. And by that time, it may have worn off and they're crossing over. Although they can get inside, I think most of the problem's been outside, where the actual ground is alive with them, and in the worst case scenarios. And you can kill and kill and kill, and still more come. Now, let's see, premise and termidor are ones used for termites too, but they can be used as a perimeter treatment for ants as well. Usually the commercial people would have to apply that. So it has some temporary control, but you're limited again to how often you can put that down. Here's a case though. I'm not sure where it was. I guess it was in Sarasota County. People bought the house, and it was so bad that the people almost wanted to move. And again, the 20 or Caribbean crazy ants are so competitive, they can outcompete other ants, even fire ants, which is interesting. So here they are, but you don't really get the scope of them as these few here. So in the following pictures, you'll start seeing some of the issues. So they were killing them, and then these piles of dead ones started to accumulate around the house, I guess even at the living room floor, so they were getting in this case here. And again, by sealing up these holes, that could have prevented some of that too. But you can kill and kill, and then you'd have live ones going over the dead bodies, moving about. And so the replacement of the dead ones was hyper, and you were very limited as to what you could do. Now, I think commercially they put the perimeter treatments, keep them out of the house, but they'd also put boric acid out, maybe some other types of treatments. But what was found out was that somebody had done some illegal dumping and had brought it in accidentally next door. And so they moved from there into this person's yard. And so that's why it was so bad. So it really needs a commercial ant control person who's familiar with these ants as to what they can do and what works best. The best I think they can do is suppression. And again, there's really probably the worst type of ant situation you can get. The only good news is they don't bite, they don't stink, they sting, they don't chew wood. So again, the spraying, they kept killing and killing, and you kept getting these piles literally every day that you'd have to sweep up. And they, again, like their sweet feeds and such, so you can use boric acid as one of the ongoing treatments there. But here, look at this here. I mean, this is, anywhere out in the yard, you have these diffuse nests amongst leaf litter and debris and such, and there's just a factory of ant production going on here. So you just hope you never get tawny or Caribbean crazy ant infestations. And so far, again, they seem to be around us. They're probably here, but nobody's brought this to my attention. There was cases in a case in Arcadia, and they were actually getting up into people's car engines. Now, I've heard, too, they can even short circuit some of the electronics in there, so that's another issue, unfortunately. So as we see with the Termidor and Premis, it's often used for termaticides, but it works for ants in this case too. Perimeter treatments can be done, but this is something that's probably going to be out of your hands to be able to use what's best to at least suppress them. I don't know at what point what will happen. They're still doing studies at the university, and I guess I think there's some testing areas up and around Jacksonville. And when they were doing actually studies on fire ants, and the Caribbean, the 20 crazy ants came in, and they actually pushed out the fire ants because they were so aggressive and effective. So is it good that they're pushing out the fire ants? Maybe, but is it replacing it with a worse problem? I don't know. So the university continues to work on that to see what's going to be the best formula for setting up a treatment plan. So a lot of these things you don't need to know. So I'm just going to go through some of this here. Don't worry about that, blah, blah, blah. Same old sort of stuff. Yeah. But there's your KM Ant Pro liquid bait dispenser again. And again, the beauty is in something like that, you can fill this up with a good amount of material and put it out and let the ants do themselves in. I mean, it's sort of a remote control. Again, I think I've seen it where they sell sets of 4. And again, they're not cheap. But I think for something like that, they may be a necessity. All right, big-headed ants, aptly named because a portion of them are soldiers who have these gigantic muscular heads. and soldiers protect the colony. They almost look, especially with the the non-big-headed workers, look a little like fire ants at a glance. Again, they can come out in large numbers, but you can see the difference in the size of the head from the soldier here to the non-soldier worker. A lot of soldier type, whether they're ants or termites, can't even feed themselves anymore because of the size of the head. But it's diagnostic, and when somebody brings in some insect parts and things, and all of a sudden you see a head like that amongst it, you know that that is really going to be helpful in figuring out what's the problem. And also, if you look here at the base on the abdomen, they have a couple of yellow spots. That's another diagnostic thing. They're very messy, so if they come inside, they'll make a lot of sand piles and debris. Boric acid works just fine. So I've heard people use that before. And one time somebody had some, there were so many, it was in a pool area, they were getting to the pool and drowning, so they had to suck up all the dead ants at the end of the day. But there's another ant that gets into the pool that we'll talk about too. One of those little things that Dr. Santana threw in here that one exterminator had mentioned about adding Hawaiian punch into the boric acid baits, he found it was more effective. So I couldn't tell you if that worked or not. So there he is, the big-headed ant. All right, Argentine ants. I just don't think I've seen these around here. I'm not saying that they aren't, but they just haven't arisen to being a pest problem. But look, I mean, the mega colony thought, look at this, a single colony of Argentine ants has colonized much of the world. So it's one family. One vast colony occurs in California. Dr. Santana said there's some in Sarasota County. And while, you know, ants are very territorial, but I guess the Argentine ants tolerate each other much better. So that's why they can become one big happy family there. So not much on that. Now the rover ant is just a problem because every summer, for whatever reason, the females will end up floating in pools. They tend to get, let me see if I got a picture. They tend to fall into pools and they swell up, and they almost call, sometimes they call them tiger ants, I guess, there because of that. The males are minute, and when they're mating, they're sort of stuck to the rear end of the female. Of course, she doesn't have wings here, but they're attracted to pools. I found them in toilets before, too. For some reason, they really like their water, and so that's where they end up. And when these females, of course, are dropped in, they've drowned, that's the end of them. And there's really nothing to do unless you could find one of the workers, and I don't think I've ever had anybody complain about colonies of rover ants per se. It's mostly when they end up in their pool. It's just a short-term phenomenon, and they've come in because they could. There's probably a rip in the screen or something that they could have repaired and kept them out in the first place. So if they were a problem, this is not a stage that you would control them. It would have to be if you saw the workers, and then boric acid could work for that. But those are the rover ants, and the number one thing is you're going to find them in the little pool there. So they continue to do work. University does work about how to control these, and certainly as it's one of the number one pest control operator problems, certainly they're always looking for the best, safest type of methods to control these. We've seen a lot of baits are very useful. and as well as boric acid, and again, even controlling insects that produce honeydew is another method there. There's lots of different chemicals. I'm not going to get into that there. We saw a lot of that. But, I think in the bottom line here is we can recommend least toxic methods, and boric acid is one of them. I mean, it works, and it's least toxic, and it's readily available to the homeowner, too. Some of this I'm not going to go through. And we'll talk about this with termites a lot too, but to keep mulch away from the house, we want a sort of not only a plant-free area, but a mulch-free area next to the house so we can inspect, especially for termites that we'll talk about. We don't want vegetation touching the house because that's a bridge, as we mentioned. We want to control the insects, and we can do that with least toxic materials, soaps and oils. And again, moisture. Sometimes ants are coming looking for moisture, and what do we got inside? We have sinks and pipes and all that, and sometimes that can be an attractant as well, and we want to control those moisture issues. Here's a bridging situation. So this, if you simply cut this off, it would make it a lot less inviting for them to be now trailing up, if these are white-footed ants, I'm not sure, trailing up to your soffit and making a colony there. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go through some of this here. So keep areas clean. You can keep your inside as clean as you want, but sometimes there's always going to be a particle of something they're going to find. So don't feel, again, like this lady, that it's a sign of filth at all. It's common for ants to invade looking for resources, and so we can deal with them appropriately. Caulking, again, if there's an if there's a spot where they can get in, find it and seal it up. That may be the end of it. It's literally, do you want to shut off the faucet or mop up the floor? I mean, that's the choices sometimes here. Inspection, again, so that you can inspect, and if there was a commercial person that came in, they would certainly inspect too. Let's see here. Talked about non-chemical, of course, cleaning up, again, killing the insects that produce the honeydew. They're also talking about vacuuming a bit here too. So, a lot of this stuff is just common sense. Any chemical you use, make sure you read the label. Be careful that some ant colonies will split or bud if you treat them. And a lot of these things are going to be temporary. Even the barrier treatments will be temporary, but these are all tools that you can use to try to suppress pests, and we're never going to be able to get rid of them. All the best we can do is suppress pests to a level we can live with, and that's just part of integrated pest management. Okay, I don't want to go through that. We're going through that. Okay. All right, I'm going to, let's see, open this up here. I'm going to unmute. I'm going to see everybody, or as many people as I can say. Did everybody get the ant tree questionnaire?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's go through some of the questions here before we get into termites. Number one, Florida carpenter ants do not eat wood. They excavate it.
True. Yes.
Two, rover ant females. Yep. A delay. Two, rover ant females are often found floating dead on the surface of the pool.
That's true.
We just saw that. Yep. Caribbean crazy ants or 20 crazy ants are the most difficult type of ant to control.
True.
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 That's the one that they have just mega colonies everywhere, and it's just very difficult to snuff them out. Four, adult ants can only swallow liquids.
True.
True. Yep, they cannot consume solids.
Yeah.
Number 5, elongate twig ants can sting.
True.
True.
Also, they call them neck biters sometimes. 6, the soybean oil carrier and fire ant bait stays fresh and effective for a long time,
False.
even in high temperatures.
False.
And you can put a seal back on to try to control it, but if it goes rancid, they're not going to go to it. They'll reject it. And so it's sort of a waste thing. 7, fire ant nests can be controlled in vegetable gardens with spinosad.
True.
True.
So, and that's an organic material, and it is okay to use in vegetable gardens. 8, pyramid ants are our number 1 pest ant.
False.
False.
They're our friend. They are our friend, and they want to control things like fire ants, so we want to keep those. Number 9, key to control the white-footed ant is management of honey-dew producing insects.
True.
True.
That's one of the 3 prongs. The other one is boric acid and preventing bridging trees onto houses. And number 10, compact carpenter ants are nocturnal.
False.
False.
They're diurnal. They come out during the day. Any specific questions that we can address?
I say to you a question.
I don't know if anybody had any chat box questions.
Ralph,
Yeah.
can you review how to deal with ghost ants? I have ghost ants right
Yep.
now in my house.
Okay. They love boric acid. So I would get yourself some PHARAOH, probably. Again, you can get it's like a preset trap. You just cut the tip off and put it down. Put it where they are because they got to find it. And they will just eat and eat and eat and eat. And then all of a sudden they'll be gone.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
And I would say, again, you don't have to be an ant expert, but a lot of these are sweet feeding, and boric acid works a lot for that. So we can certainly help you with ID of ants, as they come in or as you discover them. So not a big problem, but a common question and a common occurrence where people will bring them in on tape or something. I wish they would bring them in little vials of rubbing alcohol instead, but that's the way it goes. All right. I'm going to now see if I can do the old switcheroo here. And let's see, to get the termite one up.